just was blanking in my head. The only redeeming grace I had was they didn't ask for prayer requests for themselves. They asked for prayer requests for someone else. And so I just prayed for that person. And then later it occurred to me what their name was. You hate that when there's just like something in your head and you can't remember what it is. It's the worst. But yeah, we've been talking about the Ramses and Pithom, or Python, however you say this, these Egyptian names. Supposedly these cities that the Israelites built. Unlike Ramses, we don't really know where Pithom is. Well, I mean, nobody's ever really sure where something is unless it's still got cultural significance. But I mean, there's been a few different proposed sites for the House of Atum. This is one of them. This was supposedly the first discovery. It was done around in the 18th century. The 19th century, the 1800s. You can obviously see this is in black and white. I mean, we didn't really have color photos till much later. But this was supposed site. This is normally this is one of the few ways you discover something. You see parts of a wall or a building that are uncovered probably due to wind or some kind of weather change in the area. The other single way to tell if something is there I've talked about a few times, and that is do you remember what it's called? A tell, yes. You can tell what it is by a tell. You can tell what a tell is by a tell. But yeah, so we've been talking. There's no tell in this picture that you can see, but you can clearly see evidence of something there as he is standing next to brick walls in the middle of nowhere. That would clearly be a sign that, hey, maybe something was there at this point. After some excavation, this is what he found. He found what looks like the base of a storehouse, not a storehouse, storehouse. Simple rooms. The Canaanite rooms are simple 4-bedroom rooms. That's been pretty much the practice for a few thousand years of history. They've expanded from that with the expansion of technology, but I mean pretty much since the time of David into about 150 years ago, people were using the standard 4-bedroom house or 4-room building, not house, because they weren't really buildings. This is why we have found Tel El Maskata and Tel Ret Abeth, both in the eastern Nile Delta. The Nile Delta is the area where the Nile meets the Mediterranean. You guys have a general idea where Egypt is in Africa. So if you got like the handprint thing, the upside down handprint, Egypt is like right about here, and then you have the Mediterranean, and then right next to that coast, moving into the land of Canaan, you have the Nile River Delta, which is very flourishing with lush and green, and I don't know if a lot of trees, but certainly a lot of greenery. I have some pictures later. So we know that Python was definitely in the Nile River Delta, and this other tell also in the Nile River Delta, both having storage silos and granaries, both made with bricks that were made without straw. Why is that significant? Well, we know that the Hebrews had to make their buildings without straw because they were being punished. Supposedly it was a harder thing to do. What does straw do? Does anybody know? You guys ever see, okay, go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say, it adds integrity to the construction. If you guys are ever driving along the interstate and you see them, or a road, and you see them building a new road, and you see rebar, like slats of rebar running through it or maybe sticking out of it, that is designed that way to make it stronger. So the same way that you can have a brick building without straw. I mean, we do that today. It won't nearly last as long. We use a stronger form of mud now. We use and even like people don't really build things out of brick anymore. I've noticed that a lot of buildings, even buildings that supposedly look like they're made out of brick, will have like brick plates that you use some kind of stucco to stick on there. It's just concrete, cinder block, and stucco. Especially for the South, we use a lot more stucco in the South than you guys do in the North. And I'm not really a fan of stucco. I like brick. I love brick. I love wood. Definitely, I think that's something we're losing, but it tends to last longer in heat. So yeah, both sites. I've got a little sidetracked right there. Sorry. Both sites, they have granaries. They have brick without straw. They're both made around the 19th and the 20th dynasties. Which, if you guys have that sheet, you'll know when those dynasties occurred. We see that even though that they fit the biblical account, we don't really have a lot of proof that it was necessarily built by the Hebrews. I mean, the strongest one being that, it was made without brick and straw. There are some places in the other parts of Egypt where you see the lands made without brick and straw. Maybe not as prevalent as down here. I didn't really do a whole lot of study on that, so I can't really tell you how accurate that is. But definitely it does exist in other places, so you can't really say, well, just because it's here and not there, but it is also there. But also there is some proof that there were some Semitic people living in the areas. Or what was I looking for? I feel like I already covered. Oh yeah, such as the artifacts that were found in those areas. You don't really see a lot of pig bones in the areas. Why is that significant? Yeah, they didn't eat pig. They didn't eat pork. Didn't mean they didn't use it, but I mean they didn't really have a whole lot of use for things they didn't eat. You definitely see some difference in the way that people were buried. These tombs, they found people laying on their side, where Egyptian people were typically laid on their back. Especially the more famous you are, you're more of a kind of coffin and tomb you've got. These look more like well pits. Eventually these will be closed inside the hills or valleys or caves, or not valleys, inside of hills or mountains or caves. But in these kind of areas where it's mostly flat, you get a lot of well-type graves. So you can see this is another type of, this is actually how they did excavation, or how a lot of excavation does. If you wanted to go on a dig, you would do something similar to this, where you divide the area in quadrants, specifically the area that you were specifically assigned to. You can't just say, well, we want to go dig here. You have to go and get the permits, and even then they're like, okay, well, you can only dig in this one small part. They don't just let you have free reign over everything. And they break you up into squares, where you break up into smaller squares, and then you painstakingly dig in a little bit, and then so you have a trowel, and you probably have something like a brush, and you're just only allowed to dig your one small square. And you'll probably do that for 2 weeks and find a bunch of little stuff and be like, hey, look at this. So this is what you see them doing here, at least prepping this area, where you can see, or eventually they will find things like pottery. Pottery is a big thing. Egyptian, you do see Semitic pottery found in these areas, which is important because the pottery style is different. That's actually how a lot of dating is done through pottery. Egyptian pottery is not the same as Greek pottery, which is not the same as Babylonian pottery. It's made slightly different. There are different markings on it. There are different paintings on it. You might see, this is a very famous painting of a bunch of Semitic people coming to present themselves to the Egyptians. You can see women, you can see children, you can see difference in hair color and style. and even in the same way they might wear their beard. So even that they recognize, multi-room houses, yeah, that was another thing that I was talking about, the 4-room house, that they have found in this area. I mean, to me, it's like there's a lot of smoke, but there's no fire. You guys know that expression? Normally where there's smoke, there's fire. In this case, you're seeing a lot of smoke, but we don't really see anything. It's like, all right, this definitely proves we didn't find any copy of the Torah there, but this predates the Torah, because remember that they really haven't even gotten this yet. So, any questions on that before we move into the next section? All right. Now we're going to talk about arguably one of the 3 most famous people in Israelite history. I don't know if to say he's first, second, or third. I guess that really depends on how you might rate him. I would probably argue that he's maybe like their version of our Lincoln. Washington was probably closer to Abraham, and he's probably our version closer to Lincoln. I mean, especially in what his main goal is he's freeing his people from the evil oppressors. I think I don't know if I would necessarily rank him above Abraham. Abraham is more important to their central identity, but he's more important to their central culture. With Elijah being number 3, especially in terms of religion. So we were introduced to him very quickly in the story. In fact, pretty much after chapter 1, the rest of the Pentateuch kind of centers around him in some way or form, where it says this in chapter 2, verse 1, "Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took him into a basket made of bush rushes." I don't know what that is, but that's bulrushes, sorry. You're right, B-U-L, not B-U-S-H. Bulrushes, and dabbed it with bitumen. Bitumen, that's like a type of pitch, like tar. That one I did know. Oh, yeah, Bolton and pitch, yeah. "And she put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank, and his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him." All right, so that's the first part of the story. Why is she doing this? Save him. Because what happens in chapter 1? In chapter 1, we know that Pharaoh is doing some form of population control by killing all the males. We're going to see this again, where? In the time of Jesus with Herod, yes. So now a man from we already got that part. Now the daughter of the Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, very common place for people to bathe. Didn't matter if you were royalty back then, it's still probably something you did. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw it was a child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." Fun fact, my son was born in China. Thomas was born in China. And you know how maybe you see in movies that you put the babies in like a bassinet behind glass. Nobody ever questioned which one was Thomas and which one was a Chinese baby. Yes. It was painfully obvious. So I imagine that when she says, "Oh, this is a Hebrew baby," it's probably pretty obvious. Just something to think about. Behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on it and said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." Then his sister said to the Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew woman to nurse the child for you?" And the Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother. All right, and the Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So that the woman took the child and nursed it. And when the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of water." So it's a rather clever tale. and maybe definitely some divine intervention going on in here, is that the mother, knowing the child is going to be killed, decides she's going to let the child instead be discovered by the Pharaoh's daughter, which, if anybody probably had sway on letting the child live, it was probably someone definitely of the Pharaoh's family. And not only does it work out exactly the way that she wants it to work out, but she ends up getting paid to watch her own kids. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't you love to be paid to watch your own kids? So he survives, and he gets to live knowing his Hebrew heritage, and he also gets to live in the Pharaoh's house. There are three viewpoints on if Moses is a real person. Either you accept that Moses is a real person according to the biblical evidence, but if you do accept that, you have to understand that there is a lack of actual physical historical evidence pointing to him as a real person. Most of us probably, I'm guessing everyone in this room falls into the conservative category. The second one is that there's too much cultural significance for him to have not been a real person. However, if that's the case, then the narrative probably changed over time, where he moved on from powerful, maybe local leader to mythological status. I believe, I think last time I talked about this in the terms of like George Washington, where we have all these crazy stories about George Washington that did they really happen, such as maybe him chopping down a cherry tree. I heard one that was about him, where he came upon these soldiers and he saw some of the soldiers doing work, and the soldier's leader, the corporal, wasn't doing any work, and he's like, well, why aren't you working? He goes, well, I'm the corporal. And so George Washington supposedly gets in and does the work with him, and he says, next time you need help, call on the general, he'll always help. And I mean, it's like one of those things that sounds good, but did it really happen? I don't know. So that's how a lot of moderate historical people view it. And then, of course, there's the skeptical view. This is the people, I think, that I would easily discontinue this, easily dismiss this last opinion that he was a mythological or literary figure invented to explain Israel's origins. There's too much power in the story for that to, I think, to find that answer likely. You basically have to create something out of nothing and then put all your faith in that and then build your whole theology. That's what makes a narrative, what makes a story powerful is seeing the story in action. And so if you don't see the story in action, it just kind of falls apart, or it just becomes a really good story. And I wonder about that in the terms of what videos might be like, the more powerful cultural videos that we have today, sort of like the whole Harry Potter books, how Harry Potter kind of took the world by storm. And if like 1,000 years from now, if we somehow lost it, would Harry Potter be seen as a real figure? Maybe, but just only because of how worldwide he became a cultural phenomenon. You don't really see that in other things. So, I mean, at the very least, I'd say that I would definitely say that the moderate happened, and maybe to some extent the moderate did happen, where things were attributed to Moses that weren't necessarily of his doing. And one of those things that I think of is definitely the writing of the Torah. I mean, there's no proof that Moses wrote the Torah. Tradition says that Moses wrote the Torah, but to accept that, you also have to accept that Moses records his own death, which doesn't really make sense. That doesn't pass the smell test to me. If something smells fishy, it normally is. Probably someone more like Joshua. Joshua makes a lot more sense for someone to record the Torah, because we know Joshua was an assistant to Moses. He was with Moses for a lot of those events. We know that Moses put a lot of trust in him, and we know that he also went into the Promised Land. So he makes a more, to me, he makes a more likely narrator for the actual events of the the actual writer of the Torah. Yeah, so did all these things happen? Well, this is really what it comes down to when we talk about it in terms of archaeology, because there are certainly people who are always going to deny miracles. That you could do things in front of someone's face, and they will try to find some natural cause to explain it in some other way. In science, something has to be falsifiable. Basically, how this was explained to me is what happens if I let this go? Gravity takes over. All right, what happens if I let this go and gravity doesn't take over? Well, then something else happened, right? That would be the falsifiable event. It's like events are normally true unless X happens. Other than that, it's just a narrative, which is one of the biggest problems for something like evolution. Evolution is not falsifiable, which is why it tends, in my opinion, it tends to be more on the religion than the other side, than on the science side. But like if we were in outer space, this would stay put. Why? Because there's weak gravity in outer space. There's still gravity in outer space. There's just weaker gravity in outer space. Go to a different planet, you get different experience. You get different. You get different weights on what gravity pulls on. And on Earth, it pulls down at 9.8 meters per second. Well, that's the acceleration rate. But even that's not even true all over the planet, as I learned a few months ago that gravity is different on different parts of the planet, which to me never made any sense. I assume it would be the same everywhere, but apparently that's a thing. So basically, did it happen? So there's been a lot of, when I mean it, I'm more specifically talking about that, all right, well, what's the first significant events that happen in the book? Well, the first of those events would be the burning bush, but we're going to move past that one, and we're actually going to talk about the more significant event was, did the 10 plagues happen? Because that's largely the big significant event in the book of Exodus, are the 10 plagues. People have tried to explain it away. They're starting, I mean, I'm sure people have always tried to explain it away, but you first start to see actual theories develop about 70 years ago, especially based on this red clay, this red bacteria that is supposed to be very, very common in the Nile. It happens quite, I think there's something like that. I heard something like that happening off the coast of Florida. You guys, do you know what I'm talking about? Red tide, okay. And it supposedly kills everything, yeah. So I imagine it's something similar to that. That it comes down from the mountains. There are some mountains not too far from it. It eventually kills fish, and then of course dead fish, dead marine life, dead bacteria tend to attract what? Tend to attract bugs, and bugs tend to bring in disease, and disease does what? It makes you sick. And especially when you've got you look at the Nile as the life force. It's essentially just, it kills everything off, and then you yourself are dying because of all the effects of it. It turns the land barren, and you have the barren land, especially if you get dry barren land. If any of you've ever been into a desert, what happens out of the middle of nowhere all the time? You get these dust storms that roll through. Saw them in Iraq quite a bit. Did you ever see any when you were? Yeah. I hear they even happen in places like Oklahoma, Texas. I'm sure it's common. So people try to say that these explain the events. And there's certainly some historical documents that have documented these things. I'm not even going to try to say it. It's IPUWER. If anyone else want to try it? It's papyrus. Papyrus is a type of paper that's made of reeds. Reeds are very common in that area. You will find a lot of writing things are made on papyrus. The only thing about papyrus, it becomes very brittle, and so it will break very easy, so you got to make sure it stays well preserved. It talks about this event happening a few thousand years ago, so we know that definitely that they didn't necessarily perceive it as bacteria, but they perceived it as blood. This caused social chaos, and especially led to a lot of famine in the area. So people have said, okay, well, we see some of this happening. We know it's happened historically. Is this recording the 10 plagues? If it is, it does not seem to record it with the other events. Other things have been used to describe it, such as volcano eruptions. We know that there was an eruption around 1600 BC, and that could explain darkness. It could explain why things died. Red algae bloom is another thing. I don't know how that's different from the red tide or the red clay, but that's what people have said is going on here. But what I want to look at it in a little bit differently. I want to look at it in terms of theology, because remember that this isn't really a book that is meant to be a scientific book. This is a book that is meant to do a few different things. One, it is meant to establish God's law. And before you establish God's law, you've got to establish God's people. And so this is the first thing that this book is going to do, is it is going to bring God's people out of slavery into the promised land, which God promised through Abraham. Great. So we need to understand that that's always what we're looking forward to in this book. So this book is not so much about Moses. Moses is just the messenger who is acting as the voice for God's people. It's not about Pharaoh, though Pharaoh is certainly the catalyst in this book. He is the driving force. A few times God has to help him along the way because a few times the text specifically says that it is God who hardens Pharaoh's heart. And I think that is done intentionally to make sure that all the people will go at the same time instead of some of the people. Because if Pharaoh doesn't harden his heart, then maybe that they say, well, this sounds like a good deal to us. Sorry, the rest of you, we'll see you later. But it is always, like most of the Bible, it is about the faithfulness of God and his uniqueness. We're always looking towards a few different things when we look at exploring what the Bible has to teach us. But I think a lot of it really comes down to, and the will of God. Faithfulness, the will, and the uniqueness of who he is and what he is trying to accomplish. So let's look at it in the context of that. So here's a picture of the Nile, specifically the Nile River Delta. What do you notice about it? Well, this is just a part of it. It is kind of narrow. It's very lush, right? Normally, when we think of Egypt, we don't think of this, right? We think of, this looks more like the Amazon, I would say. But when we think of Egypt, we think of the pyramids and desert and all around it. But this is the Nile River Delta. It looks very lush. You can see, I think, some trees. You can see a lot of grass. You can see dark water, which normally represents good clay, good mud. There's actually a name for that. can't remember what it is, but I know I have it written down here. Oh, yes, black silt. That's what this is, black silt. The Nile is considered to be the heart of Egyptian civilization. Like most bodies of water, it fluctuates on a cycle. And that cycle is based on predictable flooding. When the tides, sort of like, you kind of think of like the tide, the moon, it always comes in at the same time. It does of the year. And when it does come in, it brings in a lot of this black silt. Now, this black silt is essentially like water fertilizer. It's what makes the land like it is. Yes, you're probably seeing a lot of salt water off the Mediterranean, but here, you're not really taking in that salt water, but you're taking in this area which is going to be used to make the area around it green. And that is good for one great reason. And what is that? Growing things. And how did they grow things? And maybe you don't know the word, but this is probably the number one thing that made civilization. And irrigation, yes. If it was not for irrigation, I am certain that society as what we know it today would not exist. Irrigation allows people to stay in one place. So the Nile is great for irrigation. All right, there's a good, see that very lush green area? You get the Nile River Delta. So this black silt, it's also called comet, is great for growing a variety of things. It's great for growing vegetables. It's great for growing barley. Barley is a type of oat, I think. Oat, yes. And flax. What is flax? It's actually a type of flour. Well, there's two types of flax. And in this case, it's a type of flour. So in this case, flax is used for making clothing or thread. So you can see how easily that the life depended on the Nile in ancient Egypt. Of course, then it also provides, because it pretty much runs down the heart of Africa, and because it is very predictable, unlike the ocean, it makes it very easy to trade. You can kind of think of it as the Mississippi and the Missouri rivers in the early 18th and 19th century America for offering ports from one place to the other. And it provided something that you will see pretty dominantly in the rest of these coming slides called matat. Ma'at, sorry. Ma'at is kind of like the Egyptian version of yin and yang. Are you guys familiar with yin and yang? Yin and yang is this idea of balance or stability, that you have one part that completely complements the other. So as long as everything is in balance, everything works perfectly. All right, you following with me here? All right, why do I bring all of this up? Because this is very important. The Egyptians believed that everything in their life depended on this balance. In fact, they kind of made a god out of it. And this god is not so much that the Nile River is not a god, but the idea of the balance is a god, the flood itself. And so you will see this little blue figure here. Sometimes it's green. Most of the pictures I saw of it were blue, where you have this god called the Hapi, which represents fertility, abundance, nourishment, balance itself. So without the Hapi, life isn't able to flow the way that it should. And what's the very first thing that God does? He strikes the Nile. So out of all the 10 plagues, the first thing he does is he hits at the heart of their ma'at. So without the Nile, what happens? No balance. With no balance, everything moves into chaos. And so that's what we're very, very quickly going to see, is at this point, everything is going to fall apart. So when we get to Exodus 7:17, he says, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, with the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water in the Nile, and it shall turn to blood. We see that, well, we can do this. We'll take a little bit of red dye and we'll put it in some water, but it doesn't necessarily have the same effect. I mean, my little kid can take dye and make water turn red, but can they do it on this such a large scale, the one that's going to interrupt the balance? So what we're looking at in terms of theology, this is not just God saying that he is more powerful than what those local charlatans can do, but this is God also saying that he is more powerful than both the hapi and the ma'at, and that God himself is the one in control of what is happening here. So you might worship it, you might treat it as God, and maybe that might be true for you, but it is definitely one of those small lowercase g's, and that the big G is definitely the one that can destroy it with, not even on his own, but through one of his servants. And really, God could have used anybody in that thing. So the next one we're going to talk about is the frogs. I mean, there are 10, and I'm not going to mention all 10, but I do want to point out a few of them, and specifically ones that are seen as important. And frogs are definitely one of those ones that are seen as important, because often with the cycle, because when the flood comes, it doesn't come alone. It brings the silt, and the silt brings frogs. So the frogs are kind of like the proof that everything is working as it should. Yes, we saw the water come, but now we have these frogs that have come with it, and so we know that things are on time. So frogs in their culture has become both a symbol of new beginnings and rebirth. Not so much as, you will see this a lot in different cultures and cycles throughout history, that they are not new things, but it is just the same thing happening over and over in a new incarnation. There's a lot of myth stories like that, even in Native American stories. I think I remember learning about some of those when I was a kid. So this idea that we're seeing right here with the frogs isn't necessarily unique to Egypt, but you'll find it in other places. Especially in their culture. You'll see it a lot in their culture. But often this, even though there are physical attributes of it, it's largely seen as a spiritual thing. So with it comes the frogs. They come with large numbers. They have a god of the frogs. The god of the frogs is called the Hekwet, or the Hequit, or the Heket, or the Hekat, or whatever, or some various spelling that is probably changed based on region or local dialect. Everyone's got a local dialect. You guys ever been anywhere that just only spoke the local dialect? Probably, let me guess, the Philippines? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was in a taxi cab, one guy who only spoke the local dialect, and the only thing I could do was point. I even called someone to translate, and she's like, I can't understand him at all. I'm like, how did you even get a job if you can't speak local Mandarin? But yeah, you'll certainly just the probably different dialects here on the various spelling. Again, much like the Nile, this is instead of a male, this is a female. You'll see it. You can see it like here. It's normally some kind of humanoid figure. This one here on the right, you can see how it kind of has like the face of a frog. You see what I'm talking about? Like there's the frog right there. You see this is normally seen in on religious artifacts. It's found in a number of temples that were built along the Nile. Not so much inland, but mostly where people would properly worship it. You always go to the area of the place you're looking to pay tribute. Yeah, tribute's probably the best word there. So how do we know? Or here's another one. Definitely an easier light to see. That we have this idea of frogs being associated with childbirth, but who controls the frogs in the narrative? God controls the frogs in the narrative. So if we're looking at this theologically, I mean, yeah, there are certainly cultural implications. This is God saying, well, not only do I control the Nile, but I also control the frogs, and I can do with those frogs as I please. And there's some guesses of what frogs might have had here, that essentially that, okay, well, if frogs are seen as the symbol of fertility and birth, well, in that case, frogs led to the exact opposite of those things, specifically in these last two, the death of the cattle, and of course, the death of the firstborn child. So this is more of not so much showing you archaeology, but showing you that, again, it is God in control. Cows, not so much as that you will see in places like India. Cows are also seen as both both practical in terms of what they can offer, much in like what they can offer us today. They can offer us meat, they can offer us leather, they can offer us milk. For those who practice, what do they call that? Husbandry, yes. That's not the word I was looking for, but husbandry works there. It can offer manual labor, especially for their farms. Agriculture, that's the word I was looking for, agriculture. People who have lots of cows often is the symbol of being very wealthy. That's probably even true today, too, if you own a lot of cows, because cows are not cheap at all. I knew, my last job, I was in the Midwest. I knew a guy who bought cows, and he's like, I'm going to buy these cows to flip them. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? He goes, well, I'm gonna buy them cheap, and then I'm gonna grow them, and I'm gonna sell them for the meat. And he bought two, and he made some money, but he goes, this is just not worth it. It wasn't as much money as he thought he was going to make. But they can be an indicator of wealth, especially back then, because they do require lots of space. So it means you have to have a lot of land to own them, and you need a lot of space because they eat a ton. They're pretty much always eating, always. And that's just the practical reasons. The Egyptians also used them for other things. They saw them as, again, you see this idea of rebirth. They saw them as kind of welcomers in the afterlife. Cats will become another symbol of this, but cats aren't really important to what we're talking about here. Milk is a form of washing or purification. We see this in other cultures as well. I think that this is some Nordic countries that use milk for purification. Does anybody know? No, it's not really surprising. It's kind of white. White is often seen as pure, and so it's not very surprising. The Israelites would use milk in some purification rituals too, which is why you later get the rule that don't boil a calf in its mother's milk. You guys know what I'm talking about? It's like you're double dipping there, and you shouldn't be doing that. That's why in Israel today you cannot get a cheeseburger. Bet you didn't know that, did you? I knew that. The cow god is called Hathor. That one I did know. I learned that from Stargate, which is a great show if anybody likes science fiction. Which is almost always portrayed as a female with either a cow's head or cow horns. Cow horns are probably more common, associated with things that have to do with rebirth or fertility, and some other things such as love and joy and music. I don't know why those have to do with those things, but often they're all celebrated in the same thing. She is seen as the mother of the Pharaoh, which becomes important because to them, Pharaoh is essentially God incarnate. So regardless of who it is, it's always God incarnate. So in this case, the mother is giving birth to the new god. And what happens to the cows? What happens to the cows? In the 10 plagues. I guess I'll be a little bit more specific there. No, a lot of them die. Egyptians did not sacrifice cows. They treated them as sacred. And so the fact that the cows die shows, again, that once more illustrating the point that God is the one in control. Next, talk about flies. This one's a little bit different because while flies, there's some debate on whether or not the flies should even be included here in this list. Partly because even back then, the Egyptians recognized them as disease spreaders. We still see them as disease spreaders, especially in places where you're likely to catch disease, such as standing water or human or animal waste. Flies are often associated with death and decay. What makes them a little bit unique in Egyptian culture is they are seen as also a symbol of courage. In fact, they found these little fly amulets buried with a lot of soldiers or carried on soldiers into battle, meant to protect them. But there is no fly god in Egypt. Have you guys heard of the fly god? You probably have. You just probably don't know its name. You probably don't know that that's what he's associated with. The fly god is actually Canaanite, and Jesus was once accused of being in league with the fly god, which is, that was my big clue, Beelzebub. Yes, so that is the lord of the flies. So it doesn't necessarily really fit right here in the 10 plagues because it's not something that they would have done in Egypt, but it could talk about some of the cross-cultural things, or just showing again that, especially in contrast to what's going on, flies represent death and decay and chaos, and God represents order. So it's showing that God is in control. If you wanted to know, you can see some kind of things that this is some pottery similar to Baal. So they believe that there might be some overlap right here, Egyptian pottery, and there's Baal. Baal is a Canaanite god. He'll become one of the main players much later, especially in the land of milk and honey, where he represents. I think Baal means master. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Baal means master of who he is. So Beelzebub is the fly god. Egyptians that they believed he was a symbol of courage. So God kind of like takes this twist of using their courage against them. Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to say, we all have flies, and I'm sure they did too. Mm-hmm. But he specifically says that he sent swarms of flies, which a swarm of fly is, you can hardly see through them. There's so many.
Yeah.
So maybe that could be the difference?
Maybe. Or else if you were, this is what he says in 8:21, or else if you will not let my people go, behold, I will send you swarms of flies on you and your servants and your household, and your household and your households of Egypt shall be filled with swarms of flies, and also the ground on which they stand. I don't even like one fly on me. I always feel like I have to swat it away. I can't imagine having swarms. But yeah, just this idea of, even if you're a strong person, do you think you can handle a lot of flies around you? No. But again, what's the narrative here? Well, the narrative is this is God controlling what's going on. We got two more. We're going to talk about the sun. This one is very, very important because much like the Nile, the sun is seen as the ultimate giver of life. And we figured this out a very long time ago. This is something that most of us learned in probably third, fourth, or fifth grade science class, that you need the sun to create photosynthesis. and that in turn creates oxygen and helps more plants grow, and it creates life. So without the sun, you can't have crops growing. We also know that the sun is a great big source of energy, and because the sun also moves in seasons, well, that's how they saw it, that we now know that we go around the sun does not go around us. That at certain times of the year, when the sun would come and be in certain parts of the sky, then the Nile would flow like it was supposed to. It is essentially seen as the ultimate controller of Ma'at. So that's back to that balance thing that we talked about. So the sun is important because the sun is considered to be I think head god. Oh yeah, I have it right here. King of all gods, or the father of creation. So if we have Yahweh, or we have Elohim, depending on which name you want to use, and for them they have Ra, and so while Ra probably had other powers, I'm not going to go into that very much. Normally you will see the symbol of Ra right here. On the left, the eye of Horus, which is the opposite, is on the other side. It is sometime, I think I have no, I don't, okay. You'll sometimes see pictures like this, but mostly you'll see something like this right here, where it's basically him as the head of the falcon with a disc, which is, you see that yellow thing at the top? Or sorry, not yellow, orange. I don't know my colors. That's what you get the thing, the idea of the disc. Like the sun, Ra is born new each day as a new creation, where he would spend his nights fighting Apophis, and they would battle till dawn, where he would eventually emerge victorious to greet the day as brand new until they fight again the next day. It seems like a cool concept, but just to explain night and day, that you can't see him because he's off at war fighting. But again, we see in the 9th plague that it strikes at the heart of Egyptian theology. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days, but all of the people of Israel had light where they lived. If Ra is the greatest of the gods and he is in charge of them all, what does it prove by God blotting out the sun? He does not have the power he thought he had. That even their most powerful God is nothing compared to the God of the Israelites. Or in this case, all of the Egyptian pantheon. So we have one more that we're going to talk about because this is probably the most important, well, not the most important one, but the last one we're going to talk about, and that is Pharaoh. Pharaoh is, of course, the king of Egypt, but like a lot of kings, especially kings all over the world, he is not just seen as king, but also as a divine figure who's in charge of a lot of different things, such as religion, governing, military leadership, and social order. In this case, he is not quite the opposite of Ra, probably parallel to Ra, which is why he is called Horus. And so what you see right here, very, very similar. If that's Ra, this is Horus. So Horus represents the Pharaoh. And while it is Ra's job to create Ma'at, it is Horus's job to maintain Ma'at. So he has to be the one keeping balance. And I would say that this is probably true with any leader. Any leader needs to make sure that they keep balance, because without good, stable leaders, I mean, things just kind of descend into chaos. And I know some of you are thinking, I'm not trying to use that to talk about what's going on right now. So just an observation on that. So again, we can see there's another picture of Horus right there, the sky god, the moon, the heavens. struggles against chaos, maintains set, but what happens in the story? He loses his son. So there's no new Pharaoh. But not only this is Pharaoh is being, in some ways, being manipulated by God, because who's hardening the Pharaoh's heart? God is hardening the Pharaoh's heart. And in the end, Pharaoh has to go after him, or Pharaoh decides to let them go, and then even then he changes his mind and pursues them. And what happens then? They all die. They lose. So this is how I think we have to look at the Egyptian narrative. It's not something that's meant to say, okay, I can point this, this, and this. But as a point to say, okay, well, if the Egyptians believe in this, then what makes my God any better than yours? Well, I already know what makes my God better than yours is because my God would against yours and won. And the Bible does that in numerous spots. You guys remember that spot where Elijah's on the mountain? And it's just him, and he's got like the 450 prophets of Baal and the 450 prophets of Asherah? Asherah, I think it's Asherah. And he's like, I'm going to let you guys go first. And so they spend all morning, and they're shouting to their God. And what happens? Nothing. And they go all day. And then he's like, all right, you had your chance. I even made fun of you for it. But now it's my turn. And so he not only does what says he's going to do, but he decides to like up the ante by drenching his offering in water. And then what happens? The whole thing is burnt up. There's no even standing water left. And that's, all right, well, your God went against my God, and my God won. And I feel like even though that people don't really worship the same way that they did back then, I mean, I don't know anybody that worships Zeus. I think my mic's going out. But I do find that we are constantly proving God is better than these idols that we have today. And that's something that if we're practicing good apologetics, we should always be doing. Any questions on any of this?
You know, when I think about it, I think of just the balance and what we talk about balance, and everything happened normally at a certain time frame, and so by God causing things to happen out of the normal order,
Absolutely. All right, we're going to stop there then. This is a good stopping point. Next time, we'll talk a little bit about the 10 Commandments and the Code of Hammurabi, and we're going to talk about the going into the land of Canaan. So some interesting stuff coming up. Thank you for attending my class. Hey, I missed the announcements. Are we not having the guest speaker tonight? Okay. So are we just doing the singing night then? No, I better leave this up here. Well, I hope so because I don't have a lesson prepared. Okay. Sorry? Oh, I have